Hi, everybody. This is Samantha from the Law Offices of Samantha Wolfe, and we're here today for our next installment of our monthly virtual seminars. Over the summer, we had stopped doing our monthly virtual seminars, and instead we shifted to centerpieces with the nieces. Now my nieces are back in school, so we're back with our next season of virtual seminars. So starting this month on through the rest of 2023, we'll be having monthly virtual seminars. And to start us off, I thought it might be helpful to kind of ease it back into our monthly seminars. We had a legal intern over the summer. His name is John Masters, and he was someone that came to our office with no legal background. And he's studying to be a paralegal. So he interned at our office and learned all about what it's like to work at a law office, particularly with estate planning and estate administration. So we wanted to share his thoughts and experiences. My legal assistant, Jess, did the interview with John Masters, and so I'm going to play it for you in just a second. Thank you all for being here. I want to remind everybody that we always offer initial consultations at our office, so you're always welcome to call in if you have questions about estate administration or estate planning. We'd be happy to answer them for you. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and then play the video with John Masters. And then I'll jump back on at the end and just kind of close this out, talk about next month's seminars. All right, thanks everybody, hang tight. Hi everyone, I am Jess here with the Law Office of Samantha Wolfe. We are starting our September virtual seminar called Mastering Being a Paralegal Intern with John Masters. As always, we offer free initial consultations. You can call our office at 717-655-2676. You can also email Amy. Her email address is meek@skwlawoffice.com. So we're really excited. We have John Masters with us here today. We had the privilege of working with John. He was our intern this summer. So John, before we get started with the interview, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit of background?
I grew up in Greencastle. I was homeschooled through most of high school before eventually I went to Hagerstown Community College, where I later started working on a bachelor's degree in history. Later, I went to Shippensburg and finished out that degree in December of 2019, minoring also in philosophy and political science. After working a bit to build up my savings, I then undertook a paralegal certificate program through HACC, and I'm currently on my last semester to finish out that certificate.
That's exciting. Whenever you were talking about your background in history, like I've always enjoyed history, but I'm not sure I could have gone forward with as much education as you did. But I'm sure it was interesting when you were taking your classes and doing that and learning a lot. So, John, what kind of brought you full force to turn around to take the paralegal classes and kind of proceed with that avenue?
Well, after I finished with my history degree, I realized that I didn't feel like I was really suited to be teaching in the classroom, and I wasn't sure whether or not I would have done very well in academia. I had with the history degree itself, I majored in public history, so I would have been working more with like museums and battlefield guide kind of stuff. But in order to be competitive in that kind of market, you have to have a master's degree. And so I figured I wasn't sure if I really wanted to go through that. So instead, I looked around and noticed that a lot of people that work in history actually end up going to law. So I decided that might be a better avenue to go down. So that's how I got started on that.
Yeah, that's exciting. I always like to hear people's stories and kind of how they end up figuring out what they want to do. So how did you, John, with your internship and with your program, how did you find out about the law office here? Like, was it the professor that connected you? Were you doing some research?
Earlier this summer, I informed the HACC faculty that I wanted to do an internship program and that I wanted to do something that was oriented towards estate planning administration because I had taken an elective for that in fall of 2022. Samantha Wolfe's firm was suggested to me by one of the faculty, and because that was listed as something that was dealing mostly with estate planning, that's something I gravitated to pretty quickly. especially since it was also a lot closer than other firms I've been looking at. It's a lot closer to Waynesboro than to Carlisle.
Which makes it really nice traveling.
Yeah.
So what were you kind of expecting, or what did you think it would be when you started the internship here?
Honestly, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. This was the first time I had ever worked in a properly professional legal context, and I didn't know quite what to anticipate beyond the fact that I'd be doing drafting and note taking. And also, I think beforehand we had talked about the idea of doing case summaries before I started.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, it's always, I think, a challenge sometimes when you're going into something that you don't know what to expect, and you're not sure what it's going to be like. You have maybe some idea or expectations, but you're not really sure if it's going to meet what you're thinking it will be. So
this part of the purpose of what internship is to make you familiar, to see is this something you actually want to do for as a career.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it gives you a good experience too. Like, yes, I like it, or no, definitely not. Something else might be for me. Yeah. So what are some of the things that you did while you were here during the summer?
I worked on drafting as was expected and sat in on meetings to take notes, meetings with clients to take notes. I also was working on case summaries, self-facilitated research for Miss Wolfe's book writing. And on Fridays, usually I would organize and print documents to help for setting up next week's appointments with clients.
Okay. Were you most excited about the drafting? Like, when I got to work with you, I felt like research and writing were definitely strong suits for you. So was that what you were most looking forward to?
That was something that I felt like I was most comfortable with. It was something that, because we had done assignments like that in class, it was something like, this is familiar. Once I have all the facts, I can pretty easily just kind of slip into this.
Sure.
I think the most unusual drafting was probably the drafting with deeds, especially like the deed descriptions. That was something that we hadn't ever gone through in class. That was an interesting little different twist on it.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I do feel like when you're talking about deeds, I find it a little bit challenging because there's a lot of pieces that you have to connect together and kind of go through the different process of it. So I think deeds are challenging in a whole different aspect other than drafting, but I feel like you did well with that and picked up on that very quickly, even though you didn't really have much experience with that prior. So, John, when you said before that you were sitting in with client appointments, what did you learn when you were in there, and what were kind of some of the things that you did in regard to taking notes?
I think personal rapport played a bigger role in determining how productive those meetings were than I would have expected. Because normally when I think of like meetings with attorneys, I think of something that's a lot more dry and clinical, where you just have the attorney kind of laying out all the possible options for the clients, and the clients just sort of pick one, whichever they feel is better suited to their interest. But it was a lot. And again, I feel like this is something I probably should have anticipated, but just the fact that you're dealing with something that is very personal to the client means that there has to be that kind of laying the groundwork of trust first before you can get on to the more clinical discussion of how to best pursue the client's interests, especially when it gets to like questions of like, okay, how do you want to apportion all of your possessions after you die? Which family members do you think should benefit from this? Which family members do you think shouldn't benefit from this?
Right.
Those are all deeply personal questions.
Do you feel like the clients were surprised too with maybe somehow like how the questions were personal, or do you think they were kind of expecting that, or you didn't really notice anything about that?
I don't know if I can speak to that. I know that I don't know. I'm sure it varies from person to person, especially like depending with regards to like deaths in the family or things like that. I imagine that people are normally in a place where they're very much oriented towards like this is a very personal thing. I kind of want to be able to trust this person I'm talking to about it. So there was only of all the client meetings I was in, I think there was only like one where the client tended to keep things like very like sort of standoffish and clinical.
Sure.
I don't think it's generally how the mindset the clients go into thinking about it as when they're dealing with us.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah, and I feel like too, it's kind of like when you go into a doctor's office, you have to build that rapport first and share things, and you're very vulnerable with some of the things that they're asking to be able to get some of that information down. And yeah, that's a good point. So, what is something that you think would be helpful for clients to know about how the office works and how things are run?
Deadlines are extremely important. Whenever the attorney requests of the client to have ready by certain times is generally requested with good reason, and the more prompt the response, the better served the client will be. As firms deal with multiple clients and have only a limited amount of time in the day, it's important for everyone's sake that things are done in a timely fashion. And when they're not done in a timely fashion, it means that errors can stack up, and the attorney can't be expected to disadvantage other clients just because of delays in another area. And so I think that having some measure of understanding of that would be better for everyone.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's very true. Yeah, good point, John. What is something specific to this area of law that you learned?
Again, I think we kind of gone over this, but just based on what I've seen so far, I feel like it's much more enmeshed in the personal lives of clients and other areas of law, say like contracts or even like criminal law. Just the fact that it's more like I feel like the more drier areas of estate law are things that, especially from like the estate planning end of things, is something that are more navigated around with respect to like viewing what the client's personal interests are. I don't think it's by any means a very dull thing.
Right. Yes. So what are some challenges that you experienced?
I'd say the biggest challenge was being able to work independently. Again, partly because this was my first time working in a professional legal context, and what I was very loath to act without having a clear notion of what I was doing and how I was supposed to do it. And consequently, whenever I was placed in like even a slightly novel situation, I wasn't able to exercise judgment and discern how I was supposed to act without getting confirmation first, make sure I wasn't messing up. And again, like in some cases, I think this was helpful in the sense that it helped me avoid serious errors. But in other cases, it was probably just something that I should having a better sense of how to like take a principle and apply it in a variety of circumstances would have allowed me to be a lot more independent than I was.
Yeah,
and so I think that's definitely a good skill to cultivate.
Right, but I think it's also good to ask questions, like you said, to avoid error and maybe taking more time to draft and then have to redraft documents, but to ask to make sure there is clarification there and making sure that things are done the way that Sam had requested or things like that. So I think that's good, and just giving yourself the ability to grow. I mean, because you had about 3 months here, I think it was at the office, or roughly around about. So thinking of all the so you accomplished a lot, and we kind of pushed you, and you hit the ground running in regard to drafting, and kind of just you came in the door, and we were like, here's the computer, and get to work and start taking notes. So just the ability to adapt and take situations as they came. I do feel like that is one of your strong points that maybe you don't give yourself enough credit for, that you just get in there, you get your hands dirty, and you go at it, and you learn what you learn, and you fix what you can fix. So what are the 3 major things that you learned in the short time you were here?
Probably not the biggest thing, but I think learning how to interact with clients over the phone was useful in the sense of it's not something that I was ever inclined to do in my personal life, because I don't tend to use the phone much. But just for the sake of for the sake of my future career, it's just useful to be able to do that, to work in that kind of professional context, to be able to communicate with people over the phone and articulate things clearly and get information. Sure. So that was important. Learning how to take better notes was good, not just in the sense, and not just even in the sense of like taking better notes, but just being able to, like in a professional context, start kind of back up. Like obviously when you're in school, you take notes when you have the classroom, but unlike in school, when you're in the professional context, you can't just stop everything and say, wait, I don't understand this. Can you go back and explain it?
Right.
Like when you can't do that in a client meeting. So you have to be able to better read context clues and understand what's going on as it's happening, and be able to write it down quickly and accurately. And that's another important skill to cultivate.
Yes.
And I think third was just having more practice in terms of reading and breaking down cases. I've done a little of that before, but not nearly as much. And so I think I'll ultimately end up like summarizing like 18 to 20 cases.
Yeah.
So I got a lot more practice in doing that. I think that was very helpful.
Right. Yeah, that's true. So John, I'm going to pop back to the question, or the first answer when you said about being on the phone in client relationships and just talking them through it. Do you feel that you haven't had much practice because most of it is like texting and email nowadays, or is it just in general because you have been a student and that kind of thing and not being on the phone as much?
Myself, I've not personally used the phone a lot, and not just because of like everything going more towards text, because I don't really text that much either. Just but like for people who don't do a lot of communicating electronically, either by phone or by text, having that experience and being able to know what are the proper like social cues and how to interact with people in that context is something that's important, regardless of where you end up with professionally. As that's just better communication skills in general is a very useful, very helpful thing.
Absolutely. That's a good point. So what would you recommend to others that are thinking about doing an internship, or they're thinking about the next step in regard to college or figuring out what they want to do in law? What would be your advice for them when they're thinking about that or want to make that transition?
I would say that it's best for you to identify what you want to do and why, and then orient your education towards developing a better understanding of that. That way that you either be able to tell very quickly whether this is something you actually want to do, or if you're better suited towards exploring something else. And to that end, getting some practical experience, seeing what that kind of law or kind of thing that you want to do looks like in professional context is very helpful. And so it's something you should, if any, for myself, I think my only regret is with regards to this internship is that I didn't do it sooner, in a sense of like it would have helped me get that sharper idea of, okay, what does this look like in action versus just learning in the classroom? Because again, there's only so much you can learn in the classroom.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, getting hands-on and being that firsthand is a big difference. Yeah. So looking back on your experience, you kind of touched on a little bit, but what would have been beneficial to know prior to starting and being here for the summer?
Let's see. What would have been beneficial? I think that it would have been helpful to. I feel like I was pretty prepared for this internship overall, because again, I did take an elective in like estate administration and planning beforehand, and I think for people who want, and again, like as a general rule, for people who do want to seek out a particular area of law, getting some exposure in the classroom first is helpful. Yes. So I think overall it was about as prepared as could be expected for that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Even when you were working on some of the trusts and talking about them, even in the appointment, I'm sure it was helpful to have that background, because then you could follow along with what Sam was talking to the client about. Yeah.
Like you're not relearning the terminology from scratch. Yes. Although there were still some things I had to review because it had been a year, but still.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that. So do you feel in the few months that you were here that it helped you gain and reaffirm the type of law or the area of law that you wanted to go into?
I think it's helped me identify what sort of work I'm best suited for, kind of independent of what area of law is best. It's what the kind of area of law itself, in the sense of like, I think I really enjoyed doing the case summaries, particularly, and if I could find, regardless what area of law I ended up in, I feel like that's something that I will always kind of want to gravitate towards, because I feel like that's something that I did pretty well.
Yes.
But I think in terms of like with regards to specific to estate planning and administration itself, I think that it's confirmed me that's something that I could do, and something that I would definitely be perfectly willing to work in the long term as like a future career. But in terms of being like the best suited area of law, I feel like that's something you can only figure out in terms of like comparing it with others. Because again, this is the only kind of law I've ever known in a professional context.
Right. Would you be open, John, to kind of going to other law firms and seeing the different areas of law too, to see if it's maybe a different avenue that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, I would be interested. Like I know, before I started this internship, I was contemplating doing something more oriented towards like civil litigation, because a lot of our classes were centered around that as like the required classes, or both a couple of our required classes were all centered on civil litigation. It was something that was it was something that was always very interesting to me, but I wasn't sure if it was something that I would be personally suited towards because it's a lot more fast paced than this kind of law.
Right.
And so that's something that it would be interesting to explore. I don't know if it's something I necessarily would be suited for. And the only way I would be able to know that is if I actually went into it and worked in a professional context.
Yes. Yeah. But I think that's great too. I think just having an open mind, like there could be something that would suit me better, or definitely a hard no. I know that then after you have that experience, like, no, that's not for me. So I do see where that is beneficial to intern and kind of get your feet wet and see what suits you best. So that's good. So if you could give advice to other students or individuals thinking about their future career, thinking about an internship or a different program, what would your advice be to them?
Just make sure that as you're working to narrow down what kind of law you want to work in, that you make sure that you've taken all the steps that need to lead up to that seriously, in the sense that you pay attention to and again, this is more particular to like people that are like still in school, but you should these things build on each other. And a lot of what you're learning early on when you're studying, you're going to find yourself using as you continue on. So it's best to get those fundamentals grounded early on, so that way when you're dealing with more advanced complex stuff, you're not having to like backfill and relearn what you should have already known at this point.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah. Well, John, we really appreciate you hopping on today, kind of giving us your perspective and giving us some advice for others. So again, this is John Masters. He was our intern for this summer. He did a phenomenal job. He really worked hard, and we just really appreciate you putting in that time and effort for us. So as always, again, we offer free initial consultations. If you have questions or even questions for John, you can reach out to our office at 717-655-2676, and you can email Amy and we can get those questions to John, and I'm sure he would be glad to answer them for us or get back to us. So it's meek@skwlawoffice.com. So thanks again, John, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks.
Hi, everybody. This is Samantha again. So we really appreciate John taking the time to do the interview with Jess. I know that we appreciate all of his help. He did sit in most of the appointments with me. So those of you who are clients, you may have met John. He took excellent notes during his time there. It was really helpful for me because when I'm meeting with clients, I usually like to focus on what they're saying and listening and responding to their questions. So John was really helpful because he was able to be taking notes during those appointments. So we hope you enjoyed this monthly virtual seminar. I am going to share again my screen again only because I want to go to this screen that talks about next month's seminar. So on October 12th, we are going to be doing a seminar on book writing with the boss, the Orphans Court updates. So in this seminar, we're going to have Jess interview me. Part of the stuff of what we do at our office is we try to contribute back to the community. So I author the Orphans Court rules, and there have been some updates in case law. And so we're going to try to focus on those that would affect our clients, that maybe the case law that we've seen apply to certain people's estate plan or trust and kind of what the court decided. And I'll try to extract some principles that you can take with you as to why you may want to do a trust or things to consider when you're doing a trust. So I'm looking forward to that. We'll have that October 12th, and it'll be from 12 to 1 p.m. And then I know that we already have November and December's virtual seminars that we're working on as well. So you can always check out our website. You can check on our YouTube channel, or you're welcome to call in and talk to Amy at our office, and she'd be able to fill you in about our upcoming seminars. And I know we're hard at work and working on our next installment of the newsletter, so you can be looking for that. So I appreciate everybody being on here. I'm Samantha with the Law Offices of Samantha Wolfe. Thanks for taking your time. We'll look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.